must be made by leaders, including leaders in different posts. And she can inform us of outcomes of those different types of decisions. Okay, Carol, we will hear from Carol for quite a while, and then she will respond to questions raised by many of you at your webinar registration. And I want to say, wonderful, Carol. Please begin.
Oh, thank you very much, Margaret. It's wonderful to speak to you today. I wish I could see all your faces, which I can't, but I wanted to, in my introductory remarks, to reflect on both the state of Berkeley at this moment, but also more generally the state of higher education. So this is really an extraordinary moment in higher education. If you think about the scientific fields that are transforming human life and the rate of discovery in those fields, it's really extraordinary. Think, first of all, of artificial intelligence and the incredible, you can barely open the paper without some piece on artificial intelligence and how it is changing the way in which we do work in any number of fields, the way in which we can solve problems. So there's AI, there is data science, and both AI and data science taken together are changing the kinds of problems that our scientists, indeed our social scientists, can address, can try to solve. There are the extraordinary changes in genomics, and at Berkeley, particularly CRISPR, Jennifer Doudna's Nobel Prize winning discovery that enables us to change the human genome, also change plant genomes. There are the extraordinary discoveries in neuroscience, where we're beginning to really make progress in understanding the human brain. There is all the science about climate change, just both what is happening to in the warming of our planet and ways of mitigating climate change. There are extraordinary discoveries about new materials, something called molecular organic frameworks, synthetic molecules with huge surface areas that can capture water, can capture carbon, make possible a kind of storage that was not possible before. So this is an extraordinary moment of scientific revolution that we're living in right now. And Berkeley is very much at the center of it, is a world leader in all of these various areas. And then in regard to the movement of such discoveries into the entrepreneurial world of venture capital, the distance between the laboratory and the startup, in other words, tech transfer, that distance is shorter than it's ever been before. I remember in the 90s when I was provost, I invited a group of venture capitalists and also some scientists from the campus to talk about how we could facilitate tech transfer. And everybody left that meeting scratching their heads, thinking they didn't really know how to do it. And now it's so enormously, it's just flourishing. So we have a number of incubators recently founded by the campus, the Baker Bioingenuity Hub, which is an incubator for tech transfer that's at the border of biology and engineering. We have a climate ingenuity hub that is will begin construction probably in about a year for climate startups. And there also will be an incubator for the Innovative Genomics Institute, which is Jennifer Doudna's CRISPR Institute. So we're in an extraordinary moment of entrepreneurship in the university, in which the tech transfer is it's more dynamic than it's ever been before. Now, I can imagine people saying at this point, but what about the humanities and social sciences? Where are they? I don't think that there's ever been a more urgent need for the humanities and the social sciences, because all of these scientific changes, climate change, AI, CRISPR, pose really difficult policy issues, and they pose really difficult ethical problems. So we need our humanists, we need our social scientists to study the ethical dilemmas that some of these technologies pose. We need our artists, our writers, to represent their impact on human experience. We need our social scientists to study their impact on human experience, and we need policymakers to figure out what are wise policies to regulate these the various new technologies. We're also in, as you all know, a new world of communication. Communication is so instantaneous today, and it's accelerated by social media, so that we're in a really different world of communication. Some of the good effects of the pandemic are that we have what I'm doing right now, talking to you via Zoom. That it wasn't certainly possible, and certainly wasn't prevalent even 4 years ago, before the pandemic. And then the university has grown in size, and it's also grown in diversity. So this is an extraordinary moment in higher education. I often, when I talk about higher education, quote the first sentence of Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I've talked with you a little bit about what the best of times is. Now I'm going to talk about the headwinds that we're facing. We are in a situation of financial austerity. That I've just had an emergency meeting called at the end of the day today to talk about the May revise and the challenges that it's going to pose for the University of California. We have a pressing need for a new financial model, in that state support has so diminished, in which we have to figure out how to multiply and diversify sources of revenue. We're all experiencing what I often term the hangover from the pandemic. We see it in the learning loss of our entering students, who are not, I shouldn't say they aren't as well prepared. The gaps in preparation are much more extreme than they've ever been. We have students coming in very well prepared, and we have students coming in that are much less well prepared, particularly in terms of mathematical skills and knowledge, than they used to be. And so these gaps are posing a real challenge to our faculty. There is also the impact of the social isolation of the pandemic, and an increase in anxiety that we see, anxiety and depression in our students. We have the unionization of graduate students, which is really changing interactions, particularly between faculty and the students, the graduate students working in their laboratories. And then finally, there is politicization and polarization of higher education. I thought I would never see the day when you could count on lots of stories about higher education in your daily newspaper. I always thought of higher education as a very sleepy news beat, in which universities had to really struggle to get in the newspapers. Now that's not the case anymore. There is, of course, the conflict over the Middle East. It's a conflict of extraordinary difficulty in which it's not, as in many conflicts of the past, students against the administration. Rather, it's student against student, faculty member against faculty member, staff member against staff member. And the positions are so deeply felt, with a lot of pain, a lot of anger. It seems as if the positions in the war are almost existential for a number of our students and faculty. They, of course, involve issues of both free speech and academic freedom, that, as well as the responsibility that you owe to the community. So we're in I think, a very difficult crisis in regard to free speech and academic freedom that has been really motivated by the conflict in the Middle East. But it's gone beyond that, and we've seen a kind of politicization of the university itself. I've given a lot of thought to what this is really about, and I think it has to do with a kind of resentment of elites. There's a book by Arlie Hochschild called "Strangers in Their Own Land." It's Arlie is a now retired professor of sociology. And this book is a study of a community in the Bayou country in Louisiana. And what Arlie was trying to figure out is why this community seemed to hold political beliefs that were at variance with their actual interests in regard to environmental regulation. It's a very polluted part of Louisiana. And the conclusion she came to, which is really interesting, is she says the question that's motivating the kind of unhappiness of this community is the question of who gets to be first in line. And I think if you think about higher education now, that is a question that is motivating many of the political conflicts about higher education, the resentment of the Ivy League institutions and their privileges, the conflict about affirmative action, the conflict about DEI, the conflict about admissions. It's who deserves. Universities are seen as places that give access to networks, access to wealthy, earning a lot of wealth afterwards with the training and the contacts that they give. And so the question is, who deserves that access? And a lot of people, I believe, are thinking, oh my goodness, I could, first of all, never afford going to university at $100,000 a year, nor do I think I could get in. And so that's fueling a kind of controversy about privilege in higher education. And the question, the urgent question of who deserves access to these goods. It's a conflict really about the story of the university itself. And then I should mention, although it's not as large an issue, but certainly one that has an equal amount of heat that's been generated from it, are the changes in intercollegiate athletics. That there are two things, in my view, that have created a more turbulent and volatile landscape in intercollegiate athletics than has ever been the case. One of them is name, image, and likeness. In other words, the legislation that's been passed by many states enabling student athletes to profit by name, image, and likeness. And secondly, there is the enormous power of media companies in relationship to broadcast, mostly of football games, Division I football games. And this has created conference realignment. There has also been a change in regulation enabling students to transfer every year without any penalty any place. So you have an enormous amount of motion in the athletic world with students transferring, often in response to NIL deals. That the NCAA has been legally enjoined from enforcing any of its NIL regulations. So it's the wild, wild west out there. And it really is a world of signing bonuses and pay for play through NIL. There also are a number of lawsuits on two different fronts. One set of lawsuits arguing that student athletes should be able to share in the revenues that the athletics programs bring in. And secondly, a second set of suits, some of them before labor relations boards, claiming that student athletes should be employees. So this is an incredibly turbulent world. I believe within 5 years, we are not going to have the world of intercollegiate athletics is going to not look the way it looks now. All this suggests is a very full plate for the new chancellor in terms of the challenges that he will face. I want to talk a little bit, just to end with, the campaign that we just finished. We just finished a comprehensive campaign. We had set a goal of $6 billion. I thought that was an audacious goal when we set it. We've just recently ended the campaign, having raised $7.37 billion. And I tried to create a change in philosophy with this campaign, seeing philanthropy not as about nice to haves, but about trying to use philanthropy as one of our core sources of funding for the institution. So I just want to talk about the way in which philanthropy is changing the face of Berkeley. We raised a lot of money for financial aid, both for undergraduate financial aid and for graduate student fellowships. We raised money for something I'd never thought I would be able to raise money for, which is housing, student housing. We've gotten a number of extraordinary gifts for student housing. We have been raising money for faculty positions. We raised money for 42 new faculty positions. And we've raised money for new academic programs. We have a new college, the first in 50 years, the College of Computing, Data Science, and Society. We have a new department of neuroscience. We have 2 new double bachelor's programs, the one in business and engineering, one in biology and business. And we have a 4-year undergraduate program at the Haas School of Business. All of these have been significantly funded by philanthropy. And then we've raised almost $2 billion in this campaign for research. The future of human health, the IGI, has raised an enormous amount of money. We have a new neuroscience-centered research institute called the Wild Neuro Hub that's trying to figure out the basic biology of degenerative diseases of the brain. Obviously artificial and human intelligence and climate change. So really amazing. And then we've raised a lot of money for buildings, which you can see going up on campus if you're familiar with the Berkeley campus. Gateway, which will be the new building for our new College of Computing, Data Science and Society. Heathcock Hall, a new building for chemistry. 2 new floors on Bechtel for an engineering student center. And a renovation of our undergraduate library to create what we're calling a Center for Connected Learning. So really astonishing things that show how important philanthropy is to the very core of our university. So let me stop there and be happy to answer questions.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Thank you so much, Carol. Now I will begin reading the questions that your listeners have posted on registration.
Okay.
Here's the first one. I'm reading it.
Okay.
Please tell us about UC Berkeley's relationship with Sacramento politics and the many ways of seeking funding for the campus and reducing student tuition. You've told us some of that, but give us something on Sacramento. That's a good idea.
Yeah, well, our relationship with Sacramento has never been better. Our relationship with the legislature, and our relationship with the governor's office. We're in the second year of a 5-year compact that the governor and the university have put together, but unfortunately, the state is having real budget challenges, and so the 5% increase that was guaranteed in our state allocation under the compact will not be made this year. We still won't know until the end of the budget process in Sacramento whether we will, in addition, get a cut in addition to the not getting the 5% increase. I do not think we will ever go back to the days of the really generous funding of the university in the 70s, the 80s, or even the 90s. That the states, I understand enough about the financial structure of the state and its tax base to know that the financial latitude is really not there. And so my answer to this is to multiply and diversify sources of revenue. We're working particularly on the following: on philanthropy, I've just been describing that, on non-degree enrollment, that's like summer session and university extension, on self-supporting master's programs, in other words, master's programs that can be priced in relationship to their actual cost and priced in accordance with the market. That monetization of real estate, and I think most important, more monetization of intellectual property. I already described the incubators and accelerators that we have. Those are sources of income for the campus. And of course, we're increasingly taking stakes in companies that our faculty and students and alumni are founding. That we Rich Lyons, who's about to become the new chancellor, has been developing I'm sorry, my phone is ringing and I'm trying to turn it off. There we go. That thinks that we are getting as much from our various entrepreneurial ventures as we're currently getting from the state and state support. So that's a really important source of income for us. I don't think we will be reducing student tuition. I think what's much more important is increasing our financial aid budget. So those families that can afford to pay do pay. Either the in-state or the out-of-state tuition, depending on whether they're in-state or out-of-state, and that we use financial aid to relieve those families that can't afford that, to enable them to have access to the university.
Okay, next. Now, Carol, you did mention, you talked briefly about humanities, but let me bring up the question that someone wrote out. What are the short-term and long-term prospects for funding the humanities? In smaller departments, this person says we are not seeing lines being replaced, that is, new hires, when faculty in canonical or areas of study either retire or die.
Well, we place faculty lines in relationship in part to the enrollments in units. So when a unit sees decreasing enrollment, it tends to, over time, see a decrease in the number of the positions, faculty positions that it has. Now, I understand that we have a responsibility to the structure of a field, and there is a level below which it's not responsible to go. But there is always a shifting over time of where faculty positions sit. One of the things that I think has been extraordinarily successful in this campaign and will continue to be successful is the philanthropic funding of faculty positions. We've gotten some of those in the humanities, as well as other areas of the university. I think that's a place to look. Also, as we raise money for faculty positions, we have more latitude just because our faculty budget is bigger. So it's, and as a matter of fact, the humanities were well served by faculty positions in this past year as a kind of high for recruitment in the humanities.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, here's the next one. Please share your reflections on the value of student activism to support social justice.
Well, Berkeley is a kind of main place for student activism to support social justice, beginning with the free speech movement. And then we had the, search, a strike for a third world college. We had the activism demanding divestment from South Africa in the 1980s. So Berkeley has been for a long time a very important center of political activism, and it's largely been political activism in pursuit of greater social justice. And right now, obviously, we have an encampment on the steps of Sproul Hall. And the organizers of that encampment that believe that they're protesting Israel's war in Gaza, and also justice for Palestinians. So that's what they're demanding. So it's very much part of Berkeley's identity, and and I think that students, for the most part, push us in the direction of the arc toward justice, as Martin Luther King used to say.
Well, and I think about the student activism and its effect way back in the 1960s, don't you?
Yes.
Anyway, next question. U.S. universities' global engagement is increasingly under scrutiny by the federal government. What is your opinion on the university's role in maintaining global academic and research relationships in light of ever-challenging geopolitical environments? You
Well,
know,
I think our global collaborations and connections are extraordinarily important. We are an international university, a global university, and I believe that our connections with universities across the world are extraordinarily important to our faculty and also to our students. So I certainly understand there are security concerns about certain areas of research, but I myself would hate to see an isolationist attitude prevail in relationship to United States universities, which need to be connected to universities worldwide. Most of the really important problems that we're seeking to solve are not domestic problems. The future of human health, climate change, these are world problems, and you can't solve them just for the United States, nor should you want to.
yes, on climate change, it's so important. On
Yeah.
top of which, many of those partnerships across national lines have been very good, haven't they?
Yes, they have it.
Anyway, next question. What is the moral imperative for Berkeley in the coming decade? How do we individually and collectively make a real difference in the world?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure there's a single moral imperative, unless I were to frame it in a very general terms that doing research, teaching, and service for the benefit of society. But to be more specific, I think that we are one of our moral imperatives is to increase access for students, for a diverse student body. Another moral imperative is to do research that serves the greater good. There are lots of ways in which you can define the greater good. I just talked about some of them. The future of human health, the research we're doing, just in the things that I mentioned about CRISPR. The first authorized CRISPR cure for sickle cell anemia was just recently approved a few months ago. So that the work of the Weill NeuroHub in neuroscience very much focused on understanding the human brain to make progress on neurodegenerative diseases. All of the research that we're doing on climate change, a lot of the work of the Innovative Genomics Institute is on genomic work, CRISPR type work on plants to increase their pest resistance, their productivity. So really immediately addressing challenges of hunger. So there is so much that we do that is really for the benefit of society in the world of research. And of course, we also do a lot of service of the general for the general public, whether it's through programs that tell people about our discoveries, the work of our agricultural, our cooperative extension specialists in our College of Natural Resources, all of the work that we do with K-12 schools. So there are many, many moral imperatives that we have, but they all are in the service of society.
Okay, okay. Next question, Carol. Here's one. When you reflect on your inspiring, distinguished, and multifaceted career, can you identify one or two experiences that left you feeling especially gratified?
Oh my goodness. I mean, well, just one or two. There's so many. I would say two things that I've been talking about already. One is the growth and the diversity of our student body that I've seen in the course of my chancellorship. That makes me extremely gratified. And then a second thing I would say is the extraordinary generosity of our alumni and friends and donors to the campus. The campaign, the Light the Way campaign that we just completed, has been extraordinarily gratifying to me.
Okay. Next question. How would you describe the differences in your presidency at Smith versus UC Berkeley? How were you different and how were you the same?
That's a great question. It's something I think a lot about. I mean, you couldn't have two institutions more different than Berkeley and Smith. You have, on the one hand, a public, on the other, a private, West Coast, East Coast, a research university, primarily an undergraduate liberal arts college, obviously co-ed, all women for Smith, urban environment, relatively rural environment for Smith. So very, very different institutions. At Smith, it was because it was a small community, about 2,500 students, about 280 faculty, the relatively small staff. Everybody knew everybody else. And so I had a very personal relationship to every part of the community. You can't say that at Berkeley. Berkeley's 43,000 students, about almost 1,600 faculty. That's ladder rank faculty, many more if you count lecturers, many staff. And so that kind of personal relationship that I had at Smith it's just not the way I relate to the Berkeley community. At Smith, I used to talk about there being relatively little public space, in the sense there was no equivalent of Sproul Plaza at Smith. Rather, there were lots of private and personal interactions. At Berkeley, obviously, people have private and personal interactions, but what tends to define the university is its public space. So this is a much more, being chancellor of Berkeley, it's a much more public, publicly articulated role than was the presidency of Smith. But I learned enormous number of things at Smith that I've tried to I do use every day. I learned a lot about fundraising at Smith. Smith is a liberal arts college with a long tradition of very successful fundraising, and that I learned much of what I know about fundraising from Smith. I learned about how to work with a board at Smith because we had, of course, a board of trustees, and it was my responsibility to work with the chair of the board in setting the agenda, the program for that board. I learned a lot at Smith about how a small institution creates a safety net for its students and also provides opportunities for its students that are so enriching. And I've tried to bring some of that back to Berkeley, even given the huge size that Berkeley is. So very different jobs, but also things that I believe publics, particularly in today's world in which public support or state support is diminishing, lots of things that publics can learn from privates.
I'm going to tell you one thing. Do you remember when Ellen Switkus and I used to teach that freshman seminar? And we used to invite you, and you'd come and sit right down with that whole group of students, freshman students.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good way for you to get to know them. But anyway, now we move to another question. The next question is, what did you love the most about being the chancellor, and what are some parts of the job that you will not miss? That's someone's question.
It's really great. Well, what I love are the opportunities that it's given me to meet so many different kinds of people. I get to know, first of all, starting with the faculty, about research in fields that are so distant from my own. And that's really, really exciting. But what I've also loved is just getting to know the alumni community, getting to know extraordinary alumni, working with donors on the way in which they want to define the extraordinary acts of philanthropy has been enormously exciting for me. So what I will miss is my work with alumni, my work with donors, my exposure to the kind of broad range of work that our faculty does. I love working with students too. What I won't miss, I won't miss dealing with really difficult protests such as we've had. That isn't something that I would be anxious to jump into the middle of the fray of after I retire.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you speak to the constraints that chancellors currently face in balancing the voices and advocacy of students with limiting funding landscape and political attack on the values of higher education? Someone's question.
Why don't you repeat the question again?
I'll be glad to. I was a little confused by it also. Can you speak to constraints that chancellors currently face in balancing the voices and advocacy of students with limiting funding landscape and political attack on the values of higher education? In other words, I think that person's asking that when students post against some political item that others support, that it might limit the funding coming to higher ed. How do you address that? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. I think you address that a lot in the way in which you construct the narrative of the university. And I think it's important to validate the student voices. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to do what the students demand or want, but I think that one of the things that going to university teaches you is it teaches you to develop your own voice. And that's a kind of activity that we should be really supportive of. And I think a lot of it depends on how we tell the story of the university. So it's, for me, it's a story of access. It's a story of being an extraordinarily important either 2 years or 4 years, depending on whether you're a transfer student or a 4-year student, in a student's life in which they develop both the capacities and the views that are going to come to define their lives subsequently. I think it's so important to develop the capacity for civil conversation about issues on which we strongly disagree. And I think it's really important to tell the story of research of the university. So I think it's not, I would say that the chancellor is an agent in all of this. So I wouldn't see it so much as a constraint as an opportunity to make the case for the university and how it contributes to society.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. What is the biggest challenges that women face in advancement to top executive posts? And what are the most effective success mechanisms for women?
Gosh, that's a question I'm asked a lot, and it's always very hard to answer. That I think, you know, in part, women are the kinds of responsibilities you have toward family in critical points of your career can be an obstacle that and I guess there are. I mean, I mostly think now there are extraordinary opportunities for women. There are so many more women presidents than there once were, and I see real opportunities for women in the positions that lead up to a leadership position like I have, chairs of departments, deans, various other administrative positions. So I think that if you are a woman and you have ambitions about leadership positions, it's important not to think in terms of the obstacles, but to think in terms of the opportunities. Find mentors, and find mentors that are not just women, but men too, that can advise you about the steps in your, in your career that you might take. So I myself believe that the opportunities continue to expand for women.
Okay, thank you. Now, this is a very sensitive question, but I'm going to say, name one author, either living or dead, that you'd like to share a meal with. One author.
Oh, George Eliot.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean,
tell us why. Tell us why.
I mean, I think, people talked about Middlemarch, which is probably my favorite book, is the one Virginia Woolf called it the one novel written for adults. I just think she has such a capacious intelligence and such interesting thoughts and ideas that I would love to share a meal with her.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, here's a sensitive issue. Carol, do you have plans for what you will be doing next? I hope this person wrote I'm not saying it, I hope involvement with CSAG will be part of your plans. Of course, I agree with that question.
Well, on the day that I retire, June 30th, I'm getting on an airplane with my son and my two granddaughters, and we're going to London and Paris. I told my granddaughters I would love to take them on a vacation this summer, and thinking they would probably name some kid, wherever they wanted to go, thinking they would probably name some kid place. And they said, no, London and Paris. So that's what we're going to do. And then what I plan to do after I retire is travel a lot more. I mean, I travel a lot in my job currently, but it's to places that I go to for my job, and rather than places that I am really curious to travel to. So I travel a lot more. I will read a lot more. I intend to write, probably on higher education. I love music, so I'll play a lot more music. I'll spend more time visiting friends and family. So the kinds of things that I've always taken great joy in, I will do more of.
Okay. Now this question is fairly lengthy, but I'm going to bring it up. In the midst of budget cuts, how can higher education institutions achieve their key results while also not losing the focus on supporting its traditionally underserved student populations? I think you've hit on some of this. As practitioners who are not the owner of institution operations or the decision makers, what can we do to maintain the same institutional dedication even with financial constraints? Could you respond to this question with a specific example you have experiences with at your institution or any other that you have worked with?
Yeah, that's really a great question. And I actually think state institutions are in a better situation than privates are on this question for the following reason. That at the University of California, a third of the budget must be used, a third of our tuition revenues must be used for financial aid. So it gives us a fairly generous and growing budget for financial aid that is in addition to Pell Grant and Cal Grant revenues. So we have never made decisions at Berkeley on the basis of the ability of admitted students to pay, and our financial aid has been thus far has been adequate to deal with students' financial need. We've even somewhat lowered the self-help expectations. That's the amount that individual students are expected to contribute through their own work or savings. So I think that's been good. We've also been very, very successful in our fundraising for financial aid, which expands the pool available for financial aid. Privates are in a tougher situation because privates they're really dependent on their tuition income. And any private that is not need blind, and Smith was not need blind, has to, at a certain point in their admissions process, balance ability to pay with the qualifications of the candidate. And of course, Smith would never admit somebody who couldn't do the work. But that was, for me, always the most painful part of the admissions process when we started admitting students who were slightly lower ranked in our reading of applications because they required less financial aid. So that's really I think the dilemma that that privates face that are not need blind.
Well, we're coming to the very end. This is the last question I will raise, Carol. And you touched on this point in your presentation. But anyway, it says, someone questioned, can you talk about the future of non-degree, non-credit, and how UC Berkeley is making this very affordable?
Yeah, that's a great question. Non-degree, we've decided, because it seems fair, to have a fee, but a fairly nominal fee for auditing, which is non-degree, non-credit, because it just seems to it seemed to us that it's not fair, basically, for to be, if you're to have in the same class people who are paying for the class and people who are paying nothing for the class. So we have started charging a nominal fee. We try in university extension to make classes affordable, but classes also have to cover their costs that are the areas of the university, like summer session and extension, in which we offer courses to a more general public audience do have to cover their costs. But we do make things available online like this, non-fee and non-credit. And I can see that really expanding in the future.
Okay, we have come to the end of the hour. I want to
Thank you.
thank you. I want to thank you so much,
Thank you.
for this wonderful, well, not only for this presentation, but for all you have invested in UC Berkeley. We
Thank you.
all appreciate it. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.